So I'm Daniel Mauriussen, managing partner in Drimcraftvenchers. Drimcraftvenchers is a Danish pre-Series A VC located in Copenhagen, but we're focusing on both Germany and Finland, Sweden, Norway, and sort of what we call the new Nordic region. We started in investing actually all the way back in 2016, us, the GPs together. And then we spun out as a standalone manager in 2019 when we raised our first fund. It was 27 million euros. And now we're investing out of our fund 2, and that's a 75 million euro fund. We are generalists, but we tend to focus a lot of B2B startups. And the reason we focus on that is that I think that's where we are sort of the best commercial sparring partners for founders at the very early stages. And we really see that as sort of our core value proposition to startups that want to collaborate with us. Denmark, as the other sort of Nordic countries, and I count the Baltics in that, it's an interesting market for several reasons. First of all, if you just look at the numbers, there is just a high amount of unicorn output per capita out here when you compare to some of the other regions in Europe. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that is the case. I think one of the fundamental reasons in why that is the case in Denmark is that Denmark has always been a country that looked outside its own borders. We've always had to, because we are such a tiny country, we kind of always have to think how something interfaces with the rest of the world and how the sort of value propositions we create travel across borders. We're tradespeople, really, and if you go way back. And I think that that DNA is helpful when you are trying to start a startup, which should inherently be global at the time of inception, right? If you then sort of zoom in on where we are right now, this point in time, what makes Denmark an especially attractive opportunity right now, I think there's a bunch of things that are coming together right now. I think this was also true a year ago, but it's even more true now. But it is that there have been a rise of some really, really good Danish cases on the SaaS business model, right? On the B2B SaaS business model, we've seen some unicorns do really, really well out of Denmark. And those unicorns or sunicorns or whatever, they've been built over the past 10 years, and they've been built not just by the founders, but by a set of management roles and VPs and everything from engineering over to commercial. We've just seen an immense amount of talent sort of being developed in the aftermath of the development of these companies over the last 10 years. And what has been happening in the last few years is that these sort of core operators have spun out and founded their own startups in the B2B SaaS space, either by sort of focusing on sort of the specific vertical that they, so if they were in sort of an HR tech play, they accumulated a lot of knowledge on that vertical, and they said, okay, we're going to attack this space from a new angle, or simply because of the sort of functional expertise that they develop, right? So it's at least my experience that the cohort of new startups that are being generated in the last few years, the execution risk is ridiculously small with some of these either second-time founders or seasoned operators. There's still technology risk, and there's still a lot of product market fitting to do out there, but the actual sort of playbook execution, that risk has decreased materially. That I think is interesting. There's a lot of opportunities in Denmark. I think sort of the three really interesting ones that I would look at right now is quantum, that is getting a lot of funding and a lot of attention, both from big funds and university climate here. The other one I would look at is climate tech or clean tech. We've always been on the forefront of clean tech, and I think the opportunity that is here right now to sort of clean up the maritime sector. A lot of that is going to come out of Copenhagen. Then I think thirdly, you have to also in Denmark look at the opportunity between biotech and AI. So we have a Novo Nordisk and this sort of cluster of amazing companies that's done amazing medicine over the years, and I think the opportunities that are opening up in AI will just create an ecosystem of potential unicorns around the biotech cluster in Copenhagen. So those are three areas I would look at. It's hot in Denmark and it's hot in Europe. I think we are sort of, and all VCs right now are trying to have a clear distinction between, what are basically just ChatGPT cloaked in something else, right? So I mean, I see a lot of a lot of investment opportunities coming by my table. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? When you run a Zoom meeting or you run a meeting like this, you can have that note-taking tool open, and it's just sort of just the transcription, and it generates actionables after the meeting, and you can even automate those actionables to go into your CIM, whatever, right? I mean, you can, and we ended up passing on that because what we think will happen next, and what has already happened next, is that Microsoft Teams and some of these popular tools, they're just gonna have their own ChatGPT integrations that basically has embedded that type of functionality, right? So I think what we are looking for is, we are super interested in startups that have that use ChatGPT, but we need there to be a proprietary element as well. So what we're looking very much for is, if you're an AI company that has built up a prediction capability on a certain proprietary data set, right? Then marrying that capability with ChatGPT's capability can create incredibly strong propositions. And I think that's what we're looking for. You have trained a prediction capability on one data set that is outside the scope of what ChatGPT can do. And then if you add this sort of generative capability that ChatGPT has, then what you come up with is something that is super, super strong and can collapse several things that are handled by 8 pieces of software. You can collapse that into one offering. That's I think what we're looking for, and that's a little bit more difficult to find. But I think that there's a really interesting opportunity right now. I think it's definitely not only possible, but I think it's a really good approach, actually. I mean, I would even invite foreigners to come start their venture in Denmark for the simple reason that you can do, it's easier to do your mistakes on a target population of 5 million than 80 million down in Germany, right? So I think inherently Denmark is an interesting thing to try to do your product market fitting, right? And it is consistently ranks as in ease of doing business and setting up business. It just always ranks in the top 5 or something like that globally. And I think it's a good springboard to the rest of the Europe. I mean, Europe, of course, inherently has the problem that it is not the United States, right? It's not culturally, legally bound together and by language bound together in the same way that the US is. So the US has that advantage. But that being said, the way I think about go to market cross border from Denmark to the rest of Europe is that at least sort of the cultural barrier doesn't start maybe until you get down to maybe France a little bit and then Spain and Italy. I think there's a little bit of a bubble up in the north where business is usually being done in the same way. It is a small market. I mean, I think it's not necessarily a problem. So if let's say you're sort of the standard B2B SaaS play or something like that, and I think it's big enough for the average SaaS play to do product market fitting. It's big enough to get at least to your seed stage traction and often also to get to $1 million in ARR. But it is definitely not big enough for you to get to $100 million in ARR. That's why I like it as an iteration playground towards your Series A. But you can never get to $100 million ARR. It's going to be a tough year. I mean, I think we're already seeing it in the data, and I think that's going to happen more. It's just, investment sums are just going to keep going down massively. So we kind of assume that the Series A market is going to be shut down for 2 years, basically. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but that's what we hardwire into the seed cases that we give birth to. So we make sure they have 24 months of runway, all that kind of stuff, right? So we are working with the assumption that it's going to be very, very few companies that do Series A graduations over the next, and that of course also does affect an early stage. So if all VCs are thinking about this, thinking about things in this way in the early stage also, it does mean, of course, that it's harder for startups to get through to thread that needle, right, and convince early stage VCs. If you're a startup trying to raise your pre-seed to seed, you better make sure that you have an inherent value proposition that's so strong and independent from how good am I at commercial execution. I think there were so many things to be optimistic about. We have a little bit of head tails right now in the macroeconomic environment, all that kind of stuff. But there's so much to be excited about. The technological plates are just sort of shifting under us right now. You have AI moving at breakneck speed. You have quantum coming online pretty soon. You have biotech and AI marrying and create. I mean, there are so huge, massive things happening on the technology level that I think if you just dedicate a little bit of time to make sure that your startup is riding on some of these mega trends, I think now is a perfect time to set sail, because the future does look incredibly bright, incredibly exciting if you just look a little bit further out than 18 months.